Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar event. My name is Joshua. I'm going to be your presenter today. Our topic today is in accounting, basically one vendor and who we need two checks for. And this is a pretty common support question, so we always feel like it's an important one that we have to kind of keep up with for folks. Let's jump into accounting here real quick, okay? So regarding question, the problem of or the challenge that we're confronted with accounting with one vendor and two checks, what's important to understand is that there's multiple ways that this can occur, okay? There's easy ways, there's intermediate ways, and there's more difficult ways that you can do it. So I'm going to try to cover kind of brief synopsis or cover each one of those sort of easy to, medium, moderate to more difficult processes and the ways to do that in the next 15 minutes or so. I think hopefully it will make sense, the more I go through it in terms of how that works, okay? So I'm going to start with the simplest way to do it, okay? So, well, and it's also impacted by the payment method, checks. We've got computer checks versus manual checks, and that impacts how easy this process is. And so it is different for computer checks versus manual checks, and I'm going to try to cover as much of that as I possibly can here, okay? So I've already gone through the process for the purposes of our webinar on expediency, gone in and entered the necessary bills that I want to be able to demonstrate what I'm talking about here, okay? So we're going to go right into pay bills. We're not going to go to enter bills. I've already got these entered, all right? So scenario number one is I've got two bills and I've got one vendor that I need to print two checks, computer printed checks for, okay? And this is really one of the easiest scenarios that we have. So if I go up to my quick pay and I see my view outstanding bills right down here, we notice that I've got about halfway down here, I've got two bills entered for March 16th for AEP, American Electric Power. The total balance is $469.12, but I got two bills, one for $345.67 and another one for $123.45. Okay, so those are two completely separate bills. When I was at Enter Bills, I entered the first bill for the $345.67, charged its expense, added it to the batch. Went back up, chose American Electric Power, entered the next bill for $123.45, added that to the batch. So when I posted the bills, they were clearly posted as two distinctly separate bills. And we're going to see that when we put a check mark in the select box next to those and we click Create Payments, okay? So what we notice here, oh boy, I've got one from before, an older one that was outstanding. We're going to disregard that, folks. But right here, we're going to focus on these two from church, February 2023 and rental property, February 23. I've got a rental property that I've got an account for AEP, and I've got, say, a church electric account for that, okay? So I need to print two separate checks for them for those two bills. This is very commonly overlooked, and a lot of folks see this. But over here on the right-hand side, you see the checkbox column on the right that says separate PYMT or separate payment? That's what we're going to use to do this. The most important thing to understand about this separate payment function is it only works for computer checks. It will not work for EFT. It won't work for manual checks. It doesn't work for debit cards. This only is for computer prepared checks, all right? So if I'm now wanting to print two checks for AEP, I have to not only check both the Pay Now boxes for the invoices to the left, but I now have to go over here to the separate payment boxes on the right and check those. Up here, I have to, of course, make sure computer check is my selected payment method. And then from there, if I go post and print checks, it's going to pop up and ask me, do I want to print the report? No, this is just the report of the payments. Now it's going to open up my print checks window, and now it's going to take a few seconds here, but it should pop in with, as we clearly see, two completely separate checks that I can now enter two separate check numbers, put two checks into the print queue, into the printer, and print two completely distinctly separate checks payable to American Electric Power. Okay. so that's the simplest and easiest way, but the hardest part about it to remember is, or the most challenging part about it is, understanding the idea that that separate PYMT function only works for computer prepared checks, folks. No other payment method does it work for. Not manual, not EFT, nothing, okay? So easy scenario number one, all right? 2 bills, check the pay now boxes, check separate payment, choose computer check, you're good to go, okay? The next scenario gets a little bit more complex in the sense that I'm not preparing computer checks, all right? I'm handwriting checks, say, all right? So I've got another scenario written into my data. I got here, so when I go back into pay bills, quick pay, I've got now my 2 different bills, view outstanding bills. I've got my bills here for Columbia Gas. Oh, folks, I'm sorry. It looks like I had one over here, left over here from a couple years ago. I'm not sure where those came from. But we're talking about the 2 here for March 16th of 2023, okay? I'm looking at the wrong one, I think. Hang on, give me a second. Oh, yeah, that's made up of the other one over here. So, okay, so Columbia Gas, I'm sorry, yeah, Columbia Gas. So let's use that one. Sorry, I thought I had 2 bills in here for that. Okay, so 2 manual checks, 2 bills, 1 bill manual check. Sorry, I'm getting confused myself. Be sure you're in covered insurance. Let's use that one, not Columbia Gas, my fault. I have 2 checks that I need to produce or handwrite for be sure you're covered insurance. I don't want computer checks, want handwritten checks. So I've got one for 32109 and one for the 1234.56, okay? Totaling an account balance of 1555.65, all right? But I want manual checks. All I can do is put a check mark in one of those, click create payments. Even though it shows both of the invoices, I can still only enter pay now. And if I have a manual check, it's only going to allow me, folks, to enter 1 check number at a time for manual checks. So I have to click the pay now box for one of those, leave separate payment unchecked, go up and choose my payment method as manual check, and then type in whatever check number that I want on that check, and then click post, okay? It doesn't allow me to enter 2 manual checks as part of the same pay bills or payment process, okay? Even though I've got 2 bills, all right? So somebody I think was asking a question about what about combining multiple payments for one vendor, so printing 1 check. In this particular scenario, Dawn, this would work. If I wanted 1 check for be sure you're covered insurance for the Q1 of 2023, I would just check pay now. I would not check separate payment and then go back up and choose computer check and then just go ahead and post and print my check. Okay. So again, folks, like I said, it's always about what are you wanting as the output. In this case, 2 completely separate bills, but do I want 1 check, 2 checks, and are they computer checks versus manual checks? If we keep in mind that separate payment only works for computer checks, it really makes the process of trying to work out the rest very simple, okay? So we're going to go back to my original scenario of I want 2 checks for be sure you're covered insurance, 1 for 32109 and 1 for the 1234.56. So first one I'm going to choose manual. I'm going to type in my check number, okay? And then I have to click post. Okay, says, do I want to print it? No. Now I go back up to quick pay, view outstanding bills. Here's the remaining bill that I have for check number 2. I click create payments. I'm now back to where I was before. Now notice separate payment isn't even an option. And now I just plug in the check number for whatever my next check number is, okay? And then I do post. So when manual checks, or EFT in this case, are involved, folks, the event was labeled checks, not EFT payments, all right, is this is the only way to do this when printing, when we want to have 2 separate check numbers for manual checks assigned. You must click post in between each of them, okay? Will not allow us to post those payments simultaneously, only for computer checks, okay? All right, so Third and final scenario here that I'm going to talk about is under View Outstanding Bills, my Columbia Gas bill, okay, $357, not really an amount that I wanted, but if I have one bill now for Columbia Gas and I want to have two separate payments, then I have to get even more creative with regards to how I make that happen. So if I want to make sure that there's one payment, say for $123.57 and another one for $300, then we're going to choose the bill. And this is where things get, folks get a little thrown by this, is I've got one invoice essentially. So I'm going to put a check mark in Columbia Gas, click Create Payments. So here it is. Oh, I didn't post the other one for Be Sure Your Insurance, covered insurance. Let's get rid of Columbia Gas and let's not pay that, and let's post our Be Sure You're Insured, covered insurance. Boom, it's done. All right, going back up to Quick Pay, View Outstanding Bills, Columbia Gas. Here's my bill for March 16th, Create Payments. Yeah, again, these are old bills, folks. Don't look at those. Look at the $323.57. That's the invoice that I'm paying. But I have to decide which one of these payments that this one invoice for $323.57 is going to get marked as paid. It doesn't really matter. I can pay it on the first payment. I can pay it on this. I can mark it as paid on the pay now on the second one. I just have to make sure that I check it on one of them. All right. So if I choose to uncheck that, notice my amount to pay goes back to zero. So I can still just click in here and go, okay, I want my first check to be $123.57, all right? And when I go back up here to show running balance, we now show that the remaining balance in my Columbia Gas account here, my vendor, is $200, okay? So I'm going, okay, I'm good. I've got my first payment here, so we're going to put, computer check on that one. Not checking the invoice. I can. It doesn't matter. I just have to pick it on one of them. All right. So I've got my remaining balance in there for my next payment of $200. I've got my current payment in here and ready to go for computer check for $123.57. I'm simply going to click on Post. Okay. Do I want to print? No. So I'm going to go back up to Quick Pay again, View Outstanding Bills. Here's my Columbia Gas for March 16th. Put a check mark in Select, Create Payments. Now I will check the Pay Now box, but I notice the amount to pay is now entered it as the amount of the full bill. I've already paid $123.57. Remember that? So now I just have to click here under Amount to Pay and just change that to $200. Again, now notice that under when we go to Show Running Balance, now Columbia Gas now shows an adjusted balance of zero. So I've put in the bill for $323.57. I've paid out two payments to get the vendor back to zero again. Again, I'm going to choose Computer Check. I'm marking the invoice as paid so it doesn't remain as outstanding. And I'm now ready to do Post and Print checks. No to my print. And we now notice here I've got my two checks in queue for my AEP bill and two in there for my Columbia Gas bill. Okay. Folks, there's lots and lots and lots of flexibility around how this occurs. It all is contingent on, there's so many moving parts sometimes when it comes to stuff like this. How many bills do you have entered? How many expense accounts are involved? What type of payment method are you selecting? We've seen the limitations in terms of separate payment being limited strictly to computer prepared checks. So, again, the process becomes a little more complex when you're not printing computer prepared checks, but it still can be done. You just have to click Post in between each one of those payments, as we've clearly seen. Okay. So that, again, if I did something wrong, I could still go back into my browse transactions and fix it if I really needed to. Okay. If something didn't show up correctly here, if I was not ready to and didn't want to print the check because they were gone, I would go back into browse and either reverse and re-enter, or I would correct it and come back in here so it did show up correctly. So anyway, that's where I'm going to leave our topic for today.